All right, so my name is Klaus Moberg. I'm a senior engineering director here at Roblox. I've been here almost 2 years. Before joining Roblox, I was the CEO of my own tech startup. And a lot of what I'm talking about today is actually stuff that I sort of learned firsthand and sometimes learned the hard way in leading my own company. The title of today's talk is Building Games for Reach. When you think about doing sort of anything in business, sort of broadly writ, there's two ways to think about your growth. There's like, how do you acquire the next customer, right? Like, what are you doing to get another player into your game to introduce it to somebody else who isn't currently playing it? And then there's also like, what is the biggest my game could possibly grow? And by game, again, you can substitute this. You can substitute any product. If I do everything right, and everyone who can play my game plays my game, how big could that be, right? So why should you care about reach? It's the ceiling. It's if you do everything right, and a lot has to go right, and you get a lot of luck, how big can you grow? And what is your overall potential for success? Want to start off with a little example, right? So this circle represents everyone on Earth. And I guess when you think about it, like this is the absolute maximum market, right? Like if you're selling something to people, this includes everybody. If you're selling, say, food, maybe your total addressable market is actually everybody on Earth because everyone has to eat. It's one of the only things that we all share, right? But here in this room, we're not selling food. We are selling games. And there are a few things that people actually need in order to fall into the addressable market for a game. For a game like Roblox, which happens to be online, you need an internet connection. You need access to a device that can play that game. And you actually need a desire or a willingness or an interest in playing games. I would say if you basically satisfy these three criteria, you fall into Roblox's total addressable market, which is broadly defined as, right now, gamers, right? It's smaller than everybody on Earth, but frankly, for Roblox, it's pretty darn big. Now, as we saw in some of the keynotes this morning, despite Dave Baszucki's best efforts, not every gamer in the world is yet playing Roblox. We're getting there. But right now, Roblox players is some smaller subset of gamers, and that means that in the absolute best scenario for the games that you guys are currently building on our platform, this darker blue circle represents the sort of theoretical maximum of your total addressable market. Good news, it's a big market. 62 million monthly active users on Roblox. That's huge. That's something that a lot of independent game studios, it's a number that they would love to hit. It's when somebody is starting a game studio outside of Roblox, starting off with a total addressable market of 62 million monthly active users would be super impressive and something that investors and all that stuff would get super excited about. And that's what we have on Roblox today. That's an awesome place to start. Now, how many people in this room are actively building a game? Okay, good, you're in the right conference. Your total addressable market is probably something less than this. And here's what I mean by that. So here's that zoomed in, big, dark blue circle for Roblox players, 62 million monthly active users. Let's say that you have built some super awesome custom control scripts for PC players that are 100% focused on keyboard and mouse, right? There is now an Xbox-shaped hole in your total addressable market. If you've forked the player scripts to do that and you haven't considered other platforms, you've just missed out on I think it's 4 million monthly active players or something along those lines. Don't quote me on the number, but you've lost out on some of your addressable market, right? Those people will have a terrible experience if they even get to play your game. Everyone here heard Chris Misner's keynote earlier today about internationalization. If you decide not to implement string tables in your game and the rest of our internationalization infrastructure, there's like a big Spanish-speaking shaped hole in your total addressable market, right? Maybe instead of 62 million monthly active users, it's 30 million. Now, that doesn't mean that, even if you do this, you're going to get 30 million monthly active users, but it means that if you are successful, you can't ever go above that, right? Now, what I'm not saying is that these are necessarily bad things. They're choices. As an entrepreneur, as a developer, as a game maker, your whole day is filled with choices. And what I am saying is that you really need to be intentional with these. Oops, right? It's your game. You are making these choices, and you shouldn't be undertaking actions as you develop your game that arbitrarily impact your total addressable market without at least taking a step back and trying to understand what that impact is going to look like and what it's going to mean for the future development of your product, right? Be intentional with these choices. If you think you can find a niche on our PC platform by forking the control scripts and building an awesome experience for that platform, it might absolutely be worth doing because it'll present a better experience than what the other games that are more generalized are going to present. But know that you're limiting your total addressable market from day one to just that platform, or undergo the extreme extra effort of forking those control scripts and customizing them for every platform to provide a first-class experience everywhere that Roblox can be played, right? So you can't make intentional decisions without the data and the knowledge of the actual state of the Roblox market. So in the next few minutes, I'm going to just walk through a lot of the trends that we're seeing on the platform and talk about how they might impact your game's total addressable market, right? So let's start off with this graph. This is weekly average of our player count. So instantaneous player count averaged over a week for the last 2 years by operating system. So top line is PC, green, top blue is PC, green is Android, yellow is iOS, red is Xbox, blue is our universal Windows platform, which is the PC app just distributed through the Windows Store, and then orange is OS X, Mac PCs, right? So a couple really interesting things here. We alluded to it in the keynotes this morning, but 2 years ago, in July of 2016, PCs just like dominated. You added up all the other platforms together, it wasn't even close to the total number of players playing on Windows platform, right? That's not true anymore. If you add up the two mobile platforms, iOS and Android, they are actually almost the exact same size and very soon will be larger than PC. Also interesting, Xbox, that red line down at the bottom. Relative to the other platforms, definitely less players. I can look at lines and compare them. I'm good at my job. Here's what's interesting about it, though. If you look at the average release cycle of a console video game, like Battlefield 1, it releases. Everyone who owns Xboxes or PlayStations buys it. They all play it for a couple months. They play through it and they forget about it and it dies off. We released Xbox just before this graph started, right? Like right here, actually. It was in March of 2016. And we saw a really nice uptick. And we're like, great. And then it leveled off and started to go down a little bit. You can actually see it like right there. And we're like, huh, maybe it's doing the classic console thing. No, then it came back up and it's been super steady and growing in terms of average player count ever since we released. And that is super unusual for console titles, right? So, and hint, that platform monetizes better on a per player basis than any of our others. Cool. So that's like the trend in like if you slice Roblox players from a platform or operating system perspective. If we look at players by country, however, we see some other interesting trends. This is the top 10 countries that are not the United States on Roblox. So from the top, blue, United Kingdom, red is Brazil, yellow is Canada, Australia, Mexico, Argentina, Colombia, Chile, Peru, and Saudi Arabia down at the bottom. A couple things to notice. First of all, this graph is not 2 years, it's just 1 year. Second is when you just look at it, you're like, wow, okay, so basically whoever was winning maybe a year ago is still probably about the same, and there hasn't been all that much change. But I want to highlight something very specific to the Spanish-speaking countries, especially Mexico, Argentina, and Colombia. They both experienced a pretty significant amount of growth last winter relative to the other countries. Again, this is like relative numbers. And then also in the last few weeks, as we've been releasing Spanish localization tools, we're starting to see the Spanish-speaking countries increase. Who would have thought, right? But if we go back and compare the trend to the operating system trends from 2 years ago, PC used to dominate, and believe me, if we showed US on this graph, it would be like on the 4th floor, right? Like it's a lot larger than these other countries right now, but we're starting to see that trend up, and I think if we have this same talk or a similar talk in 2 years, we're gonna see these Spanish-speaking countries and frankly, all international markets starting to dominate the signal. And it's a huge opportunity when you think about your game's long-term total addressable market to build for a larger audience. Okay, users by age group. I think everyone here knows that Roblox's current target market is 9 to 13-year-olds, right? And 2 years ago, at the left of this chart, that orange segment was basically, orange plus blue was as big as everything else, right? Significantly bigger than everything else. That is actually starting to change. So if you extrapolate out to the right, blue has grown significantly. That's the under 9-year-old market, right? It used to be a small fraction of our core age demographic, that orange swath. It's now getting close to it in size. We are also seeing significant growth in the over 12-year-old, over 13-year-old market. And this is a really interesting choice for you guys, right? Remember what I said, it's about being intentional. It is really hard to build a game that universally appeals to each one of these color-coded bars. The same content that appeals to somebody under the age of 9 may or may not appeal to somebody who's 17. Most likely it won't. From a revenue perspective, if you think about total addressable market, not just as the number of people who play your game, but then you multiply for each one of those people how much they're capable of spending. The overall spending potential changes dramatically as you go through different age demographics, right? Granted, on Roblox, oftentimes it has to do with the parents' spending potential, maybe not the kids, but each one of these swaths is going to have different attributes. If you think you can build a game that is super attractive to somebody in the 17 to 20-year-old age demographic, there are players on Roblox today who would love to see that content, right? And you might be able to dominate that yellow swath, even though you have a smaller total addressable market than you would if you were building something for a wider age demographic, right? It's about being intentional with those choices. Now, later today, Sorkis is going to talk about upcoming feature on our platform, which is an age rating system that basically makes sure that kids are experiencing content that's appropriate for their age. This is actually an opportunity for you guys, right? It means that it'll actually be more appropriate to build content targeting specific age demographics on our platform moving forward. And you might actually have a way of getting your content specifically targeted towards appropriate age demographics if you're focusing on a specific age swath. Under 9-year-old, 9 to 13, older age demographics, right? Again, it's about being intentional with those choices. Okay, 2 more pieces of data to look at before we get into some tactics. This is a screenshot of an internal tool that we use at Roblox to look at where people are currently playing the platform. And this was taken about 3 weeks ago at 9 a.m. here in San Francisco. So this is a summer day, morning West Coast, midday East Coast of the United States, early to mid-evening in Europe, and like middle of the night in Asia, right? And this is pretty much the way, like, I think most people think of the overall Roblox player base. Super bright in the US, tons of players here. United Kingdom and English-speaking countries or the English-speaking countries, United Kingdom and Ireland. In Europe, tons of players. A smattering of players elsewhere. Again, most of the content's still in English. Interestingly, we're starting to see some really bright spots again down in South America. Colombia, Brazil, Argentina. Spanish localization is helping with some of that, but there are also a lot of people who are playing our content in English. If we fast forward exactly 12 hours, though, it's 9 p.m. here on the West Coast. Kids are still awake. We still see some bright spots. East Coast, it's like midnight. It's the summer, so kids are still awake. But there's still large player bases. But we're starting to see some pops in East Asia, right? This is noon in Hong Kong, in Singapore, or thereabouts. I can't do math that well. But we're starting to see actual player base there. And as we internationalize Roblox content, as we introduce support for East Asian languages, we're going to see that take off. So if you're starting to build content today, you've got to be thinking about these international markets and what you can do to support them moving forward, because it's going to have a dramatic impact on the total addressable market for your game. Cool. OK, so how do we do this? Let's start off by talking about that first graph, the number of devices that Roblox supports, right? We are a multi-device platform or cross-platform gaming entity, whatever you want to call it. I think we all know that, generally speaking, content on each of the individual platforms that we support can vary in terms of exactly what that player is looking for, how they interact with it, and what makes the best experience. PCs are, by and large, pretty powerful. They're expecting immersive gaming environments, and it's really easy for them to be social while they're playing because they can generally type and control their character at the same time. At the same time, if we contrast that with tablets, on a tablet, your interface is almost certainly touch, and you have dramatically less experience to chat and interact and be social while you're playing because the keyboard covers up the vast area, the majority of your controller and viewport while you're playing with it, right? That problem is exacerbated even further on mobile devices like phones, where the screen real estate is extremely small. You basically have to stop playing to interact socially with people. And it's also a much more lower powered processor, especially for the Roblox player base, where oftentimes they're using hand-me-down devices. So you have to be a lot more worried about performance. All of that is sort of orthogonal to the console experience, where right now, supporting Xbox One, generally speaking, the processing powers and stuff like that are pretty high, but the control mechanisms and the interface are dramatically different, right? So how do you build games that work well on all of these platforms and maximize your total addressable market? This is where we get the classic Roblox question that we see on the dev forums all the time, which is, oh, well, just give me an API so that I know what platform my player is on, and I will customize it for them, and everything will be great. So question, when are we going to get an API to tell us our player's form factor? Answer, never, right? Why? Well, what form factor is this? Is this a console? Yes. Is this a tablet? Yes. If we were enumerating this in an API, what should we respond with? Other. So here's the issue. We can't forecast what Nintendo's going to come out with 3 years after this. Right? And we don't want to return other because you can't refine your content for other. What we want you to do is build your content for the specific attributes of the platform that your player is on, not the platform itself. So if your player happens to be playing with this thing in its tablet form, not hooked up to a TV, we would return the actual pixel dimensions of the screen. If they're playing with the controllers as opposed to the touch screen, we're going to let you know that. Right? we're not going to just say it's one thing versus another. We're going to give you the actual actionable attributes that you need to customize your content for that experience. I am not saying we're building for the Nintendo Switch. But if we did, we would want the APIs that we build today to just work, right? Our goal is to build, is for you to build your game once, and it works on every platform we support today and tomorrow. And we can't do that if we're just enumerating Xbox One, because in 6 years, that's just not going to be a thing, probably. OK, so I've only got 2 minutes left. I'm going to breeze through this. But obviously, a lot of this comes down to the decisions you make with your controls and your UI impact the total addressable market. It impacts the experience that your players are going to have on each of the various platforms that we support. Don't fork the control scripts if you can avoid it and if they're consistent with your overall vision for your game. This will allow you to inherit updates that we make absent a future package system so that you're going to always be up to date with the latest support that we can provide for each of the individual platforms that we support. Make sure you're using UI layouts and constraints as opposed to hard coding UI, because if you hard code it to specific pixel dimensions, it's just not going to look good on everything that we support. You want to use dynamic constraints, right? And good responsive UI won't help if your game is constantly crashing. 2 things to do here. Get access to devices if you can. If you have the financial resources, actually test on real devices, and especially on Android, test on low-end devices that give you an idea of how your game is actually going to perform on the things that your players are actually playing. Now, if you don't have access to these devices, obviously Studio has an emulator. Please just at least play through your game with the emulator in a bunch of different screen sizes so that you know if there's a major UI bug on a various platform, you're not automatically ruling out that user from your game, and it's not being taken out of your total addressable market. Other things to consider, we've touched on these already, but localization, like, guys, string tables, use them. It's going to increase the number of people who can play your game. Upcoming age restrictions, definitely attend the talk by Deepak Sorkis later today. He's going to go into exactly what's coming out here. And then the future, right? This is a constantly evolving platform. We're constantly going in new directions. Our goal is to make Roblox available everywhere people play games. And so think about that when you're building your game. Think about how you can abstract the way that people interact with the various systems in your game so that they will work anywhere we might be able to go in the future, right? It's important to consider that now, because otherwise you're going to have a lot of work to do to customize your existing content as the platform matures into the future. So thanks again, Klaus Moberg. I'll take any questions that we have right now. I think we have about 3 minutes. Question up here?
About not displaying what device they're using.
Yeah.
There are use cases with like analytics, so I
Yes.
know what devices
Yeah.
I've actually gone through my own analytics.
Right. So we do anticipate in the future providing you with data about your player's experience on a per device, on a at least per form factor, per OS, and potentially even on a per individual device basis. Like if you are crashing on a specific model handset, first of all, like we're probably doing something wrong, because like the Roblox experience shouldn't be that dramatically different across all the different handsets that we support. But that's data that we'd probably want, if there wasn't something that we were trying to address internally, that's probably data that we eventually want to expose to you guys through developer analytics.
Okay.
We do have plans to expose dramatically deeper developer analytics, and they will be on a per form factor basis so that you guys can do this type of debugging. What we don't want you to do, or what I think you shouldn't try to do, is a priori customize your experience just based on form factor, right?
Yeah.
Because what's an iPhone today is different than what was an iPhone 3 years ago, like pretty dramatically. And if you just enumerate platform at that level, you're not gonna, your game's going to break in 6 months because something new is going to come out, right?
It's probably better to.
Yep. Over here?
Over here? I mean, my voice is loud enough.
Well, we're
It's
streaming.
For the recording.
Oh, okay, I knew that.
You can't reach all the people watching from home.
No, you weren't.
Yeah, I was quizzing her.
Whatever you say.
I don't know whether or not you're allowed to release this data, but I noticed that on the vertical axis of both the weekly average player count as well as the user by age group, you are missing max and min data.
Yep.
Any comment on that?
It was not on the graph.
All right. Do you happen to know?
Yeah, we're not in a position where we want to release the actual numbers.
Understandable.
They're super cool numbers. The intent here was to show you the relative trends, right?
Yeah.
Like the percentage of our platform that was PC 2 years ago versus today, and the idea that that trend is going to, we think, repeat when we think about international expansion and when we think about age expansion moving forward.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you.
And I think that's all the time. Oh, okay, super quick, rapid fire. Last question.
Will we ever have like access to those global heat maps?
That's a great question for Deepak, who runs our developer product. Deepak Nair or Deepak Sorgas, anyone named Deepak who works for Roblox, you can go talk to them about it and say, like, I think it's the type of thing where if our developers say, I'd really like to know where my players are playing when, we might be able to provide it for you. Sweet. Thanks, guys.